you know, like G Herbo. I don't know if you listen to him. To me, he's one of the most lyrical like street dudes. Another, not gonna say, I'm gonna say probably one of my favorites out of Chicago. Like that dude can spit.
Yeah.
And the thing is,
And
man, he talks about some of the realest stuff, like the stuff he's been through, man.
yeah, that one that he did on Flex, that freestyle, and whoever has not checked that out, I don't know if you could drop a link in whatever in
It'll
the.
be below.
Thank you, but no, like that, he's tight, man, and I think that a lot of those rappers, it's sad because Chicago's such a dangerous place, and this doesn't. I don't want to take away from how beautiful it is because I think that happens a lot too when you talk about the reality of the situation that we live in, but I think that there's a lot of artists, right, that didn't even get to make it. And you're talking like 16, 15, 16 years old, right? And I think you know a little bit more about the Chicago music scene. I think I'm more like, I love like New York style hip hop. I don't know what my problem is. Like I just love that.
You like
like
old school hip hop.
Yeah, like I don't know. It's just a different era. Like I feel like it's like it's more nuanced. Like you could be hard as hell, but you don't have to like say it like that, right? Versus nowadays, like they're talking about like shooting actual people, like talking about really killing each other, and they're naming names and gangs and crews. And I'm like, I think that there's a place for it. I wish it wasn't the way it is, right? Again, because that kind of perpetuates the negative narrative that Chicago has. But again, man, you have these young artists talking about their lifestyle, and unfortunately, the reality of the lifestyle is the fate that a lot of them end up meeting, and it's sad because, like oh my gosh, who is it? Fredo too, right? Like, and I'm not saying like not even necessarily him being young, but there's a lot of other artists. What was his name? There's a couple artists you put me on to that were like mad young artists, like they're like 16 years old. Rondo, maybe was that?
Yeah, Rondo number 9.
Yeah, man. Like it's just sad, man. You see a lot of these artists, like they really have potential, and Chicago just does its thing if you don't get out quick enough. Unfortunately, so vice grips.
No, it's man. A lot of these dudes were really talented. And the thing is, man, they were naturally talented rappers. And it's like, yeah, they would talk about the street stuff, but like they all had their very own unique way of doing it. And that's something that takes somebody who's good at it naturally to do. Like that doesn't come easily. Like you can't just start rapping in 6 months and blow up and get millions of views unless you're like, you have something unique, you have something that not just the story that you're telling, but the way you're flowing, your image, all that stuff comes into it, your voice. Another great artist out of Chicago is Juice WRLD, one of my favorite artists, because to me, he was so talented. Like, it's incredible. That dude, man, like his freestyles and like just the amount of music he made in the 2 years that he was really famous. He blew up in 1 year. Like, it's just crazy. And he wasn't so much about that street life in Chicago, but he definitely lived it. I think that he experienced a lot of trauma, and that kind of fed into his drug addiction and ultimately what he passed away from, because that you can tell in a lot of that usage of drugs, I think, comes from the trauma or things that he's seen in Chicago. And even though he has millions of dollars in fame, that stuff wasn't really addressed properly. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, it starts with your people, right? And I think that whatever. I mean, there's people have falling out, I think, and sometimes that could really hurt the circle you have. But I think, like, if you're from Chicago, man, the thing about, like, I'm huge on, like, the company you keep, right? Like, I say, like, OQP, right? Like, only quality people, because in Chicago, man, like, it's such the history is so fresh from some of this stuff that specifically black men have to deal with, right? Like, I mean, I don't think people really appreciate the gravity of, like, segregation in Chicago. So, like, in Massachusetts, for example, I think especially when we were in college, like, I came off very insensitive, and oftentimes I think to allies I would come off racist. Whereas it's not even racist, it's just like Chicago is segregated. And what I mean by that is, like, it's not a black neighborhood because I'm calling it a black neighborhood. It's a black neighborhood because it's a black neighborhood. Segregation made it a black neighborhood. And mixed people in Chicago don't really fare well because there's not a lot of us. And Mexican people in Chicago don't get along with black people. Puerto Rican people don't get along with black people. And it's vice versa. I'm not going to blame one group over another, but I think a lot of it has to do with that segregation where it's like, man, if you can't find, like, good people quick, you're gonna have those problems. You know what I mean? Like, even when I go back to Chicago, man, like, it's a reality check every time, right? Because you're thrown back into it so quickly where you're like, right, I go home, my family still lives in poverty, they live in the same neighborhood I grew up in. And we don't even have it the worst off, right? Like I know people who've had it much worse than me. So it's tough, man. Like definitely rest in peace, Juice World. And I hope that, someday we can get to a point where we change the neighborhoods in Chicago. We change the perception of Chicago. We can really change, at the end, the fate of some of these young men who really they shouldn't have to have their life end early because of trauma. And I know it's easy to say, but again, like someone who's been through this exact same trauma of like your friends passing away, right? Like everyone in my family being substance abusers, domestic violence and stuff like that. So I definitely understand it. And I wish that, like for me, I had a community of people behind me at a liberal arts college that, I had like one or two people really go through the exact same stuff. And then the rest of it's kind of just people who really understand, like they have a sensitivity to some of that type of stuff, that trauma. And so they can kind of deal with it well. But man, if you can't get out of there and you're just dealing with the same people you grew up with and they don't have necessarily the right tools to navigate their own trauma, that's a lot of the outcome is just shot and killed or overdosing, or any kind of suicide in general. I think is high in Chicago, the rate. So yeah, man, it's tough. Juice WRLD is an incredible artist, and I think for me, like Juice WRLD really like in it, not sonically or necessarily like a flow or any like musical similarity sometimes, I guess. But like to me, I feel like Juice WRLD reminds me a lot of Kendrick. Like remember when I told you I was like, I don't know that I like Kendrick, but like I don't dislike his music. I just don't understand it yet. And I think that like certain artists, I think Juice WRLD was ahead of his time. Like again, I think he reminds me of like Polo G a little bit, where you're like, he would talk about a lot of that trauma, and you're like, man, have we always been doing this? Like, is this is the origin of music? So in that regard, you're like, I understand it, and I really like where he's coming from, and I appreciate how he's doing it because it's unique to him, right? And he's gained, like you said, complete just huge notoriety for it. So I think like it's hard to knock anybody, even if you don't like them sonically, for that, right? Like at the end of the day, like his lyrics are on point, his music is definitely ahead of its time. So man, yeah, definitely a tough loss for Chicago, and I think for music in general, like you said, it's not just Chicago, man. Like we lost a Chicago native, but you lose a lot of I think he represented hope for a lot of people, and I think you lose some of that hope along with him. So definitely a tough legacy to follow up in Chicago, but I think we have some really good artists, so I think that we can definitely make that transition to kind of not fill the shoes because it's impossible, but I think try to reintroduce some of those concepts in a different way. So
yeah, for sure. Do you have a third artist that's your favorite, or?
Oh, third artist, man, this is so unfortunate. R.Kelly, I'm gonna punch you in your face if I ever see you. I mean, fuck, man. Yeah, I mean, honestly, R.Kelly is like my third favorite artist. Like if we're talking about like trying to primarily push Chicago artists first, and he's not necessarily like predominantly rap. But I think, again, man, he did a lot for music. It's just tough when you have
musically he's dope.
That's what I mean. Like you have, he really helped me get through some tough times. So for me personally, I absolutely do not condone the behavior, how he treats women and what he does with women. But it's hard when you capture the cadence of a people, right? And it's hard not to respect the ability to capture that while recognizing that he should do better as a person.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, man, that's a tough one. That makes me sad. The R. Kelly stuff like really hit me hard specifically. I like really didn't want to believe it, but at the end of the day, some of that trauma will have you doing things that don't necessarily promote your best interests. So I can understand where it comes from without understanding why he's doing it necessarily. So
right. Yeah. Like, I think musically, there's no doubt about that. And I think that's tough with a lot of artists. They kind of get like, no matter how good they are, like musically, like I'll say like Michael Jackson, even though it like came out that he didn't molest children after he died, and everyone still doesn't care the fact that came out. It's like all his music and all the good things he did and all the good positive message he said to some people that doesn't matter. Like they kind of just go to the negative. But it's like so many of those artists that have those positive messages that are generational and that last for years and years, you know, they get thrown into that box. And I think people who understand the message and want to have that message come true, they'll see past that, you know. Like Michael Jackson, I mean, I wasn't gonna say this, but I think he's probably my third favorite artist, just because of like his messages in his songs, you know what I'm saying? Like Man in the Mirror, it's a very like, it's a very simple song, but if you hear it, it's like, it makes sense. He's like, before you change the world, you have to change yourself. And I think in that song he was actually talking about how he was taking pills, and so he wanted to stop that, and he wanted to change his life, but nobody knew that at the time. And then, you know, he has other songs where he talks about, you know, world peace and equality and, you know, self-confidence, and just a very great artist, and somebody who I know when he passed away, I was kind of upset about that, because, you know, I like felt like he was somebody who was the king of pop, like just a really great like man, and somebody who was a positive role model for a lot of people and a lot of kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, man, like sometimes it's deeper than, I feel like we can easily get caught up in the music that artists make, and that we attribute that to like their exclusivity of like what we think their greatness is. And I think that Michael Jackson's a pretty incredible depiction of like how that is not true. I think that like what he did outside of music perhaps was a bigger deal than what he did in music, which that sounds wild, right? Like you're like, how could, it's Michael Jackson, you just said he's the king of pop, but you know, I think like what people don't realize, and he was a little bit before our time, like he, you know, we were kids when he passed away, so, or early teens maybe, and so like, you know, like I remember like my mom talking about like she did the Hands Across America, where everyone in the US joined hands, right, and they made a line across the country in unison to support a humanitarian cause, right? So you're like, you look at some of these things and you're like, man, that transcends music, and yeah, you have to respect his ability as an artist to make music, but as a human being, you have to respect his ability as a leader to create enough unison in people, right? To create enough comfortability among people to want to do something like that, right? Because that is a huge deal. It sounds simple because you're like, well, that's not necessarily like the Women's Rights March, but it is a start, right? And I think that he really understood the importance of changing the direction in which the world was going, right? I think that there is so much negativity that it is easy to get caught up in negativity and like to realize, right, that there is racism in the world, and there are all of these issues, but at the root of everything that we are people, right? And again, I don't ever want to strip like cultural significance from anything, because I think that that's equally as important, but man, at the root of everything that is a human problem, if we could come together, the truth is we could fix the problem. That is the truth. And I think that he understood that. And I think that it's tough when an artist like that passes away, because, you know, similar to like what Tupac said, I think that a lot of these artists, they're like, I don't necessarily have to change the world, but I do want to be the one who sparks the mind of the person who changes the world, right? And I think that really resonates with our generation, right? Like that's, I don't know, I do feel like that. I'm like, I don't really care about necessarily like having the credit for a lot of these things. I just want to make a difference. And it's tough, man, with Michael Jackson, I think, because like you said, some of his stuff is overshadowed by people who don't really understand or care that some of that stuff was made up. But
like that song, you know, like Earth, I don't know if you heard that song, Earth Song, and it talks about, you know, I wouldn't say climate change, but it just talks about war, and it talks about how, you know, we really have to take care of ourselves as a race, and you know, make moves in order for our future generations to be safe and to, you know, prosper. Songs like They Don't Care About Us, you know, a lot of people didn't get that song. That song was talking about, you know, political figures and, you know, stuff that even to this day, you know, people don't get and they don't understand. And you know, songs like heal the world, and like just so much, like such a big catalog too. Like I probably don't even know all of his songs, but just such a talented like voice, dancer, entertainer, icon, you know.
Icon for sure, man, for sure. And at such a young age, man, like I don't think people, I mean, I wish that people could understand even the gravity of that. Like I'm not talking about like a Disney star. I'm talking about like that dude was in the limelight his entire life. You know what I mean? Like to the point where like some of the negativity that we deal with in regards to trauma from parents, because it's going to happen. Like I'm not shitting on parents. Trauma is going to happen. There's nothing you could do about it. Sometimes there's things you can, but most of the time it's outside of your control. So, you know, like for him, having his dad as his manager was completely just a bad experience for him personally, right? And if you really follow his career or any of the Jackson 5, right, any of his siblings, you're like, man, maybe the dad wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. And it's hard because we don't appreciate some of the music that came out at the time because he's a kid, right? It's hard to appreciate.
It sounded good.
We have an issue in this country with ageism, right? So like we don't really respect young people in general. So to start at such a young age and be prominent your entire life and to take that power and do something positive with it and try to make a difference in people's lives, that transcends music, right? And that's what that is what makes you an icon. Even, you know, beyond the dancing and the moonwalking, that is incredible. Those are accolades that I'm positive in the deepest part of his ego he might have appreciated a little bit, right? But I think at the forefront of his understanding of the world, that he knew that he had a job to do, and I think that it was beyond music, but music was the vector to kind of change some of those things that he's seen within his life and generation. Yeah, man. Michael Jackson. That's such a sad one. I remember I was like distraught. I was crying over that. So like he's been a huge musical influence. So
like I remember I got like, you know how like in our elementary school they used to have like those book fairs, or like they would come with like CDs on like a table and you like be able to like pick a couple or whatever. And I got one of his albums and I remember looking at it and I was like, oh, it was like the only one left or some shit, so I got it. And then like I was like, oh, it's gonna be whack. And I like played it and I was like, he's like really good. Like people, because back in the day, you know, like our, you know, growing up in our generation, I was like, oh, Michael Jackson, like making fun of him and da. And I was like, okay, like because I was that. And then I listened to his music and I was like, man, this dude, like there's something about his music that just like touches you in like a very like emotional, like deep way. Like it's almost like I always say this, like I feel like music is like a universal language. Like it's like even if you don't like fully understand the message, like you kind of can feel that like pain and that connection through it when it's really, really good music. And I feel like he had that connection just globally with people from all over the world. And that's why he was such a big artist. People from all over the world loved him, and like no matter where he went, even if they didn't understand what he was saying, or like they knew who Michael Jackson was. And it's like I feel like you said, like he had a responsibility, not a responsibility, but he took that responsibility of being such a big artist and turned it into something positive. And that's what I think makes him such a great artist and such a great person, using his power for good, as opposed to using his fame and his money for, you know, evil and spreading more evil throughout the world. He wanted to spread the goodness, and he wanted to spread kind of the positivity that I think really makes a great artist and makes somebody a good person, you know?
Yeah, man, absolutely. That's another, again, overdose on for his too, right, man? That's a lot of greats.
I mean, his death was kind of, yeah. Well, Prince, I think, was similar to Mac Miller. A lot of these artists, man, Mac Miller, Lil Peep, rest in peace. I think somebody recently, something like that happened. But it's the fentanyl, man. It's like they're doing something with these pills where they're putting in fentanyl into it to make it cheaper. These artists are taking it and they're overdosing because that medication is about 100 times stronger than morphine. And if you don't have the tolerance for that, then even the minute dosage will kill you. And if you're taking like 2 or 3 pills of that, you know, it's over.
I mean, that's if you're lucky, you know. I mean, you're talking, some artists are, I mean, addiction, they're past the point of normal addiction, and that's, you know, consumption every day. They're at the limit where they're doing 20, 30 of these pills a day, you know.
Different types of pills, you know, mixing stuff.
It's tough. Yeah. But I think that goes to talk about the culture of music and the state of the world we live in as well, right? Like, I think a lot of these artists, like, again, I think when you talk about like some of the fucked up stuff that they do, you have to talk about the artists like R.Kelly, because yes, again, you can absolutely understand as a human being that he's a terrible, in this context, he's terrible for those actions. But I think that if you look deeper, and I think that it's whatever, maybe this is part of our liberal arts degree, but you know, I think for me, I think that there has to be some humane like understanding of what leads up to those events, right? And I think that with addiction too, like, it doesn't just start out like these people are just like popping pills. Like, that's not, self-medication is a problem in the United States, and part of it is accessibility to these drugs, right? I think that part of
education,
it, education is a huge one, man. Like, just not understanding, like even just not understanding, again, like, we always, I laugh because we end up talking about this individually a lot, but when you don't really know like what stuff is made out of on a really deeper level, then it's hard to advocate for yourself, right? Like, and that goes with cannabis too. Like, I'm not a proponent of like cannabis that isn't grown in a way that's good for people either. But I think that people don't know what that even means, right? Like that's why we still have people calling weed. And I think that there is weed, but there's also cannabis, which is medicinal. And I think that there has to be a difference for the sake of, you know, like Reggie is weed. No one's like doing anything special. They just like grow it in a box in their room. You know what I mean? And that's fine. There's you're going to take care of a lot of the trauma you have, I feel like, with the euphoric effects of that. But also you can put yourself into depression with that. You know, you could, if you're not really paying attention to how you're growing, what you're growing, you're not testing it, you get into a funk, right? You end up depressed for 6 months. You don't really realize it until you don't have weed for some reason, right? And I think that we need to do better as a society with these artists. I think we need to, you know, I'm not trying to like say that these people need extra care in terms of they're rich, so they do have the resources if they need them. But I think that like we need to like really take a step back as human beings, and like the lens has to change, man. Like the way that we like ridicule and like critique artists. And I think a lot of it is that we as a country, we moved away from arts and sciences, right? Like we completely just moved away from like what these things are. And so like when you go to Cuba or Costa Rica or Mexico or Puerto Rico, right? Like you realize like, man, these people really have the essence of culture because they stayed with music and they stopped critiquing it. Music is just an expression of self. No one asked for the critique. No, you know what I'm saying? Like I think that's what makes me laugh about J. Cole's music is like he is himself, including when he's corny as hell. Which I love that. I'm like, hey man, there's some lines where I'm like, what is he talking about? Like it just sounds funny. But I'm like, that's who he is, man. Like how am I supposed to, I can't knock him for that, right? Like I don't hate any artist anymore. I think that there's a genre of art that hits my soul different. And it's like that for everyone, right? Like some people in Chicago, mumble rap hits their soul. Chief Keef doesn't always hit my soul. Like I'm not always on that. You know what I mean? Like I think like what did Cat Williams say? Like what are you gangbanging on bacon? Like you know what I'm saying? Like you can't make my breakfast. Like you can't be waking up hard, bro. You gotta like take it back down a notch. Like. We definitely have to like reevaluate like how we critique some of these people, man. It's too harsh. I'm like, you can't be telling artists to go kill themselves over an album, or like people out here acting crazy over Kanye not releasing his music. I'm like, hey, it's Kanye West, man. He can release his music whenever he damn near pleases. He went through a divorce recently. Give the man a break. Yeah. Please, a little bit.
Now, it's the thing is they don't see, that's the thing, man. Like these younger kids don't see these artists as humans, you know? Like they're always like, oh, like especially with all these artists who've passed away, like, you know, Juice WRLD, Lil Peep, Mac Miller, they're just like, oh, they're drug addicts. Like, why do they have to take the pill? Like it's their fault that they're dead. Like, it's like, come on. Like, there's definitely, if they were nobody, no one would care, right? But it's the fact that we have social media and the internet and everyone can have an opinion, then suddenly that becomes the, like, topic of what they are, not so much their music, you know? Like, it's really sad because it's like, no wonder these people are turning to drugs. No wonder these people are using drugs that are huge artists, because they're getting all this hate from millions of people. And it's not so much, I think I heard somewhere on a podcast where it was like, back in the day when you were famous, there was no social media. So it was like, you would never hear the hatred. And nowadays, it's like the majority of what you're going to hear through social media is hatred, because people who like you aren't going to say much. They're just going to listen to your music and be okay with it. Like, so it's like, it's different, especially these young artists, man. They grew up on social media. I mean, we had social media growing up, but it wasn't to the extent where we had a cell phone at 11 years old. And like, we're looking through Instagram and looking for validation, looking for acceptance through Instagram, and looking at comments. And it's a lot for them to take in. And these artists die at 20 years old, 19 years old. And it blows my mind, because at that age, man, like, I'm not to say I probably should have died at some point doing something stupid, but it's like, that shouldn't be happening. Like, that clearly is an indication something's going wrong within that generation and within just the stigma toward them, you know?
Yeah. So. No, I mean, I think at the end of the day too, even the generational stuff I think a lot of it is social media, just exclusively. I think it's just the fault of social media, not necessarily saying like they're literally responsible, but I don't think that the intent was this, you know what I mean? Like, I think everything starts off with great intention. Like, I think Facebook at its core, at the very beginning, right, was an EDU. Like, you had to have an EDU. These kids don't even know. Like, you had to have an EDU to have a Facebook. Like, grandma had to go back to college to get a Facebook, bro. Like, it wasn't that easy. So I think like now, with the ability to say whatever you want, like, and do whatever you want, and like, sadly enough, a little bit with this younger generation, I think that everything is instantaneous, and that's part of the problem, but also everything is filtered. So it's like, you get your cake, you eat it too, you get the look, you get what you want. Like, everything is just it's too accessible. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Like, I think that accessibility to, like, for example, like, like scholarly databases, I would love to see accessibility go up there. Where I don't necessarily want a lot of accessibility is like my social media. Like, how many 12-year-olds do I want interacting with my content? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just don't want to interact with children because I don't know that they're ready for it yet. Like, right. Like, yes, I think the kids that experience a lot of these things, the trauma, right, at an early age, like, I think urban kids will always have a place with the content that I share because they grow up with these problems. But I think when you have some of these issues that some of these kids don't understand, where you're coming from like rural, urban, or suburban areas, and then you're critiquing some of these things because like you can find immediate success because you can create a Spotify account and you have the money to produce it and you have the money and backing from your parents to do your hobby. I get it. Everything looks mad simple nowadays, and I think that, you know, I think to J. Cole's point, right, where he talks a lot about like, I'd rather see you broke and rapping about that. I would. I'm one of those people. Like, and I think that for me, like, I reach out to these artists a lot. Like, when I see that artists are kind of like going through something and it becomes social, and I don't give a damn if artists ever respond. It's not about that. I think like I just want people to know at a deeper level that like, beyond all the bullshit, beyond all the walls that every single person puts up, there's a human being, you know. And I think like artists, for as expressive as they are, it's not it's not even a tenth of what they experience, right? And I think like you and me could definitely attest to that. Like I'm a mad emotional person, like, and yes, I show it in terms of like frustration a lot. I think that that's where mine comes out. But like, people don't know like the genuine 24/7 who I am, you know what I mean? Like, I don't share that on social media. And if I did, I'd be open to the same criticism, right? And it's not that I don't care about the criticism, it's just that like I don't need validation either, you know, like, but I do, again, like, I want to make sure that other people know that there's people out there for them, right? Like, basketball players need people, like, they're humans too, all of these people, WNBA players, like, especially because the blasphemy I see about them online is like the most ridiculous stuff I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, man, like, music is tough. I just wish that we get to a place where music was back down to the art, where it got back down to the emotions and the feelings, where we can have a dialogue about it and not necessarily be like, oh, this artist is trash. Like I don't know. I don't like Tyler, the Creator's anything. but I don't hate him, so I don't have anything negative to say. His music's fine. I think that there are people who like it, and if I don't, then I can shut the hell up. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's that real.
Speaking of Tyler, the Creator, man, if you hear his album Bastard or Goblin, sounds nothing like what he makes now, but those albums, man, actually Goblin and Bastard are like a whole therapy session. Like that, he has skits where he's talking to a therapist and he's going through the songs and talking about different things. And it's like, I was hearing, that's 2012. And I think when I was hearing that shit, I was like, oh, like, you know, like it's like, you could be like, oh, it's shock value. But I think that a lot of those songs were like literally therapy sessions for him. And like, I don't think people were ready for that, you know, because people don't even know about those albums. But though, if you hear those albums, man, there's some deep stuff on there. And it's like,
oh, dude, yeah.
It's like, there's definitely artists who can do that, you know?
For sure. They should. And they should, right? That is the medium to do it on. And I mean, dude, think about like So Surreal, right? The one that we did, or So Real rather.
Link down below.
Link down below. You know, and pardon my fucking language usage. I'm trying to rewrite that. I wrote it at an unfortunate time in my life where I didn't understand what the hell I could and could not say because I was an urban kid from Chicago and nobody told me. With that being said, though, you know, like, I think like at that point, my friend Eduardo had gotten shot and killed. My friend Chris was shot and killed. I don't know if Nico had passed away at that point, but I know this kid Omar I knew. I don't want to say he's a friend, but I tried to help him. He was a young and he got shot and killed on my block. You know, so like I wrote that with like a really heavy heart, and like it just came out how it came out. Like it wasn't necessarily like I had no motive, I had no nothing. It was just that was a therapy session, right? Like it just from everything from the hook, the chorus, like everything just happened organically. Like I was just feeling like that. So, you know, man, like it's tough. And again, like I think that artists should have that space to do that. And I think that we need to have, for lack of a better term, I think we need to have some of that like that wheelock respect for people to voice their opinions in a safe space. But no, you know, like I don't know, man. Like it would, for example, like as your friend, right? Like it would really piss me off to see people critique your music in a negative way because they don't. To critique someone's music negatively you'd have to be in the mindset and the place where they are, and I just don't think that a lot of people are in those places, to be completely transparent. You know, so that's why, like, again, like whatever, just like Polo G, Tyler the Creator, even young J. Cole talking a lot about feelings and whatever, just real shit, what's going on. Like I think people overlook like the song Lost Ones, right? I'm like, man, that is the most like urban relatable experience of any song I've heard in terms of like anything that's not like violence related. But that's a reality for people, right? And it's like, yeah, dude, you could critique 15-year-olds who have kids, but like you don't even want to understand where they're from if you haven't. You know what I mean? So like, how could you possibly speak down on them or attack their character for something they don't understand the gravity of the situation, and for you to even say it, you don't understand the gravity of their situation, so, or appreciate it. So it's tough, man. Music is in an interesting state right now, 2021.